They had a concert and he spoke, and I kind of think we dropped the ball a little bit. We should have just took a bus and a lot of people. And but it was really neat to go there and listen. They had Newsboys was there, and they had a bluegrass singer there, and they had sang a while, and then Franklin Graham got up and he gave a sermon. It was a salvation sermon. But what he's doing right now, if you're not haven't heard about it, he's doing a Route 66 tour from St. Louis all the way to Sacramento, California. And for every few days that he stops at different places, he was in St. Louis, Springfield. They were in Oklahoma City last night. I think they'll be in Amarillo in a few days. But what Franklin Graham was wanting to do there was to get back to the core of when the people was traveling, searching for a better life. And what he thought would be a great idea was take the old Route 66 tour and hit all those spots like going out west when people was searching for something. They were searching for a better life. And it was a neat opportunity to go to that. And I was thinking about my sermon this morning. I want to ask you this question. Are you in God's bubble? Are you in the presence of God? And, I want to kind of go back. You talked about the Route 66 tour, about when people were going and going out west to get a better life. Think about the frontier days and all of those days when America was being built. What was people's priorities like? I want you to think about it. People's priorities was pretty simple. There were just a few things on the list that they knew that they needed, that they wanted, and that's what they built their whole life. They believed in God. What was very important to them, they needed a shelter. They needed somewhere to come in from the storms. They needed places of protection in the if you want to say the cowboy and Indian days. However, they built forts for protection. But they had a place to go. They had a shelter. They had somewhere that they could call home, safety. Something that they had their basic needs provided. For us, we have a lot of needs. Actually, we have a lot of wants, right? How many of you teenagers have lots of wants? Some of us adults do too. But basically, our basic needs is to keep warm, be fed, and have water and stuff like that. Our basic needs to live is pretty small. And I want to kind of bring that to us today is our priorities can either make us or break us. And it's important for us to get our priorities straight. For us to have our priorities straight, we got to be in God's bubble. A lot of times I think we get stuck in our own bubble and it's all about us. And we never ever ask the creator of the world, what he wants my life to be like. See, because God has a plan for each and every one of our lives. He has something for you and he has something for me. And I know for most of my life, I never once asked God, what does he want me to be? I told God what I wanted to be, and I wanted him to bless it or make it happen. And so many times we get in trouble is when we do go our own direction, we go our own way, and it is not working. There's so much going on right now. There's so much evil. There's so much hate. There's so much anger in this world today that people, they don't even know how to live. The sadness of this week, there's 3 men in our community that lost their life this week. 1 literally, and 2 others men will never be the same. That's a fact. And the thing about it is sometimes that our bubbles come together and they bump and rub against each other. And this evil, this world is the product of us not allowing God to be in control of our life. It's not because God doesn't have the power to. He wants us to make it our choice to say, I want God or I want the world. What's the world give you? You think about what's going on in your life right now. Now, each one of us at different spectrums, right? Some of us may be content, happy. Some of us may be broke. Some of us don't even know what to think. Some of us just may be numb. But the thing about it is how the success in our life is based on our relationship with God. I know there's some people who say, well, I don't have a relationship with God. I don't want one. You know what? Your life is still based on your relationship with God. We cannot just say, close our eyes and say, God's not here, God's not real, and that just goes away. The truth of the matter is God is going to be a part of your life in one way or another. And it's important for you and me to understand and realize that if I have a relationship with God, my life will be a lot better. That doesn't mean the storms aren't going to come. That doesn't mean the trials and the temptations aren't going to be there each and every day. What that means is God's going to give us the ability to do what's right. You know, and I'm just as guilty. I go out in the desert sometimes, and I choose not to let God be in control of my life. And it shows. And it shows on our attitudes and how we address other people or how we interact with other people. Our happiness cannot be based on someone else, on a person. Our happiness needs to be based on a relationship with Jesus Christ. And when we have a relationship with Jesus Christ, it doesn't matter what all the other people do to us. God has us. And that's the relationship he wants with us. But we have to choose to be with him. We have to choose to be in God's bubble. Now, Wednesday nights, we've been going through Acts. Actually, we finished this Wednesday night. But I want to give you a portion of, in chapter 27, the second to the last chapter. It kind of gives us an insight of how we should live our life and the consequences thereof. But in chapter 27, Paul, if you know the stories, he was arrested and went to court several times. And then finally he said that when they knew the Jews were going to kill him in Israel where he was at, he said, I want to appeal to Caesar. And at that time, and the Romans was in charge of the region. What that did was that took the control out of the Israelite people's hands. And then he got to go to Rome and appeal before Caesar, and those people couldn't take his life. And as they were going, they didn't just get on an airplane and get there in 20 minutes or an hour or two or get in their car and drive. They either walked or they got on a boat. And the boats and the travel in that time in the sea, which actually it hasn't changed, but the boats have got better. It was very dangerous. Storms come up, things like that, and especially certain times of the year. Right now we experience in Florida and down in there the hurricane season, right? And a lot of people, they don't travel when a lot of that's going on. Well, in the midst of this, Paul's going, and they're in this ship, and it's state of the art. Got 2 sails, right, and 3 oars, and I hope all the boards are still there, right? It probably was a pretty rough boat because it was carrying 200 and some prisoners. And they probably didn't really care if that had any accommodations. Well, in the midst of this, they get going down through it, and just like it was, a storm came. And it was a rough storm. And they weren't sure that this boat was going to stick together. And they're worried. They're scared for their life. They know that they're in this water, and if this ship goes down, they're done. They're done. They're not going to be able to swim to shore. So I'm kind of getting in the middle of the story, but I want to start in verse 21. Excuse me. Acts 27, 21 through 26, but it says they've been going through this storm for quite some time, but it says, but after long abstinence, Paul stood forth in the midst of them and said, Sirs, you should have hearkened unto me and not have loosed from Crete, and to have gained this harm and loss. And now I exhort you to be of good cheer, for there shall be no loss of any man's life among you, but of the ship. For there stood by me this night the angel of God, whose I am and whom I serve, saying, Fear not, Paul, thou must be brought before Caesar, and lo, God hath given thee all them that sail with thee. Wherefore, sirs, be of good cheer, for I believe God, that it shall be even as it was told. Howbeit, we must be cast upon a certain island. God spoke to Paul in the midst of this storm and said, if you guys, God's going to rescue you, and he's going to save all your lives. in the midst of this terrible storm, and it was very real. They knew that if this boat hit rocks or whatever, they were going to lose their life. And God spoke to Paul, and then Paul stood up in the midst of all these guys. Paul was just a prisoner on this ship. And he said, God has spoken to me and said, if you'll stay in the presence of God and trust in him, he will save your life. See, I think that's speaking to you and me so strong today, is if we're in the presence of God, God says, I want to rescue you from what's going on in your life. I want to take care of you. I want to be there with you. But you got to be there with me. You got to want to be there with me. See, God can do anything. God has the power to do anything. But he wants you and me to be willing to trust him to do it. We can't live our life however we want to live it and then ask God to protect us and bless us. We got to be in God's presence. We got to be in God's world. We can't be living in like the devil and asking God to bless it. It don't work that way. And that's what gets us in a lot of trouble. In verse 27 through 32, it says, but when the 14th night was come, 14 days of this, 14 days of the storm. There were several days, okay? Was come as we were driven up and down in Adria. About midnight, the shipmen deemed that they drew near to some country, and sounded and found it 20 fathoms. And when they had gone a little further, they sounded again and found it 15 fathoms. So the water's getting shallower, and they know that they're getting close. Then, fearing lest we should have fallen upon rocks, they cast 4 anchors out of the stern, and whisked for the day. And as the shipmen were about to flee out of the ship, when they had let down the boat into the sea under color, as though they would have cast anchor out of the foreship, Paul said to the centurion and to the soldiers, except these abide in the ship, you cannot be saved. So Paul gave instructions to his captors, to the soldiers and the centurions, and because they were going to take the little rowboat and they were going to get out of there. See, one of the policies for the Romans was if anything happened on that journey, they should kill all the prisoners and leave. So basically, if you're going to get in the only rescue boat and leave before it breaks up on the rocks, the prisoners were going to be killed. But Paul gave a very stern direction to these soldiers at this time. He says, if you leave the presence of the protection that God said he's going to give, you will lose your life. You will lose your life. And I want you to think about that in today's context. When we're not in the presence and the protection of God, we're going to lose our life. Now that may not be physically, but it for sure will be spiritually. See, the thing about it is God is our I don't know, I got a frog in my throat this morning. God is our protector. He is our strength. But he only is if we choose to let him. See, God wants to be our best friend. He wants to be the one, our caretaker. But we have to say yes. If we skip on down to verse 44, it says, basically, and the rest, some on boards and some on broken pieces of the ship. And so it came to pass that they escaped all safe to land. Just like Paul had spoken, they all got to land safely. God did exactly what he said he was going to do. Now I want to kind of put this picture to you. It wasn't like they sent in the helicopters and the lifeboats and all these people and they went in and got them. How did they get to shore? They swam, they floated on boards, and they did all these things. See, there's going to be things in our lives sometimes that are tough, right? And the faithfulness that we have to know that God's going to take care of us is important. Now I'm going to do something I haven't never done before, kind of do a demonstration. I am not an artist, so you just kind of just bear with me here. But I want to just kind of put this here. God is the center of the universe. God is the one that created everything. God is the one that controls everything. God is in control right now. A lot of times we think, what in the world's God doing? There is no God. He's not in control, but God's in control. And we choose to live where do we choose to live our life? Have we ever asked God where I should work? Have we ever asked God about marriage, who we should marry? How about, my wife can attest, I don't have very good handwriting, so I'll tell you, hobbies. And I'm just going to, I'm not write them all down, but how about our social life? How about social media? All of those things in our life, most of us are guilty that we never put them in God's bubble. We never ask God. And we wonder why we fail miserably. Because we're outside of God's realm, in our own realm. What does the earth have? What does the earth have that outer space does not? Gravity. Holds us stable, holds us standing up, right? So why do we choose to go float around in space outside of God's presence and struggle when all we have to do is stay in God's presence? You know, most of us, if we get up and give a testimony, 30s, 40s, 50s, whatever, we spent 20 or 30 or 40 years out here. And so many things in our lives, a wreck and a mess. Those situations that happened this week was outside the realm of God. Because people chose to do that. We choose to live outside of God's protection. God says, I will never leave you. I will never forsake you. I love you. I'll take care of you. I'll provide all your needs. Physically, spiritually, mentally. All of those things. And we say, God, I don't have time for you. How many of us are guilty that we come to church when we don't have nothing else to do? Think about that. And I've done it for a long time. I'm the preacher now, so I kind of need to be here every Sunday. But I don't think about not coming. For a long time in my life, I woke up in the morning and wondered and decided whether I was coming or not. And then I'd make a list of what I could be doing. A good share of my life, I didn't feel good enough to come on Sunday morning. See, we got to get into God's world if we want to have anything in our life. But what we do is we say, I want my own world. I want my own rules. And God, I want you to bless me. I want you to make that happen. Isn't that funny how we do that? How we say, God, I don't want you to tell me what to do, but make sure that that you take care of me, you protect me, and make sure I got all my bills paid and nothing bad happens to me. But God, don't tell me what to do. I kind of see that sometimes in our kids. Take care of everything, but I want to do whatever I want to do. See, we're God's kids. Some of you got teenagers, we're dealing with things like that. But you know what? We're God's teenagers. If you think about us adults, and I don't care how old you are, we're God's teenagers, and we're hard-headed. We want to go our own way, right? We do. I want to go to Luke now. Luke chapter 15. Most of us know this story, but I want to present this in a different way than maybe I've ever done it or I've ever heard it. Luke chapter 15, 11 through 21, and it's talking about the parable of the lost son, or the prodigal son. But I'm not, for time's sake, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I just want to kind of go through it. But there was this boy that came up to his dad and said, you know what? I want my inheritance now, and I'm done with this life with you guys. I'm done with it. I don't want to be there. But, in the essence of what he's saying here was, I wished you were dead, and I want my inheritance now. And I want to go do whatever I want to do, however long I want to do it. And as I was looking at this, thinking about that, do you and I not do that? Think about God. Think about God being the Father and you and me being the Son here. And we're telling God, I want you to make sure that my life, I have all the pleasures that I can possibly think of to indulge in with no consequences. And I don't want the life that you want for me, God. I want to make my own life. And as we read this story and we go on through this story a little bit, it talks about the boy went and done that. He left, and I like, it'd be kind of, if you had a son come up to you today and say, whatever you was going to give me in inheritance, I want it right now. I don't want to wait till you die, and I'm out of here. What would your response be to that son or daughter? Probably in words, over my dead body, right? Like the only way you're going to get it, and you still may not get it after I die now. You just may have got wrote plumb out of the will. Right? Looking at the thoughts of how we look at things, right? It might just see red and like, you're just saying you wished I was dead so you can have some money. But boy, do we not do that to God? See, God's got an inheritance for you and me that's going to last for eternity. And we say, well, I can't wait for that. There's so many things that I want to experience in this world, God, but I don't want you to be a part of it. Can you just give me all the things that I want right now? The young man went out, and it says it didn't take him very long to spend every ounce of money that his father gave him with all kinds of crazy, wild living. Drugs, women, whatever. And it didn't take very long, and he's broke. He was broken. And if you know much about the Jewish culture, it was a disgrace to be around pigs. Unclean. It said that he had to take a job feeding pigs. And he wanted to eat what he was feeding the pigs because he didn't have no money to buy no food. See, in the midst of this, as we look at this parable and we see this thing, it's talking about your life and my life. And God has a plan for your life. He has one for mine inside here. In righteousness and honesty and love and all those things. And we say we don't want that. We want all the things on the outside of God's world. This young man struggled for quite a while. The amazing thing about that story is it says, and he came to his senses. See, the story wasn't over. See, every one of us have done that. Every one of us have been that son in this parable. We wanted something more than we thought God was going to give us. So we had to experience what the world had to offer. And the world bit us back, didn't it? We lost everything. We're broken. See, in the midst of that, because we left the presence of God. Just like on that ship when Paul told those men, God won't protect you if you leave this ship. Well, you know what? When we leave God's presence, when we leave God's bubble, is why we're broken and why we are struggling and why we feel the way we feel. That we don't see happiness or joy in our life is because we get out of the presence of God in the midst of this world, and this world just wants to destroy you. The Bible says that Satan is like a roaring lion, roaming this earth, seeking whom he may devour, destroy. And the bad part is we leave the protection and the shelter of God and go find Satan. You say, that sounds pretty strong. It is. Is that not exactly what we do? When we leave the presence of God, there's only two presences in this world. You know that? There's not many places to be. There's two presences that we can be in. The presence of God or the presence of Satan. There's different levels, but that's the truth. That's the truth. I want to go to Psalms 91, 1 and 2. I encourage you to just read this whole chapter, but I'm just going to read 2 verses. It says, He that dwelleth in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. I will say of the Lord, He is my refuge and my fortress. My God, in Him will I trust. See, at some point in our life, you have to say that. You have to believe that. I will trust in God, and He will protect me. See, we have to have a relationship with Him. We have to choose God. And I'll go right back to it. There's only 2 choices to make in this world. God or Satan. In the present current events, we probably get tired of hearing, how can I be safe? And especially from some of the places we're hearing it from. Just trust me, I'll take care of you. Well, without getting too political, I'm not going to trust in my government to protect me for anything. I'm going to trust in Jesus Christ. And Jesus is the one standing in the boat saying, I'll protect you if you stick with me. But if you leave, I'll let the consequences of the world have their way with you. And that's the message. That's the cold, hard truth, is we got to make a choice who we're going to hang out with. Are you in God's bubble or the world's? We're going to play an invitation song. If the Lord has spoken to you in any way, every one of us have a tendency to go out in the desert, go our own way, just like that lost parable of the son. But the awesome thing is when God says we can come to our senses and come back. You know what the father was doing when the young man came home? He was standing looking at the road, waiting for the son to return. He was waiting. God's waiting for you and me to return. Let's pray. Or go ahead and play the song.